The city is not yet awake, and yet it breathes. Paris in the 14th century lies draped in mist, its spires like dark fingers reaching into a bruised blue sky. Along the banks of the Seine, barges rock gently against their moorings, creaking like old bones. The water carries the smell of wet timber, fish, and smoke from fires long gone cold. On the bridges, a few lanterns sputter, their flames guttering in the damp wind. Watchmen shuffle past in heavy cloaks, staves tapping the cobbles, muttering to one another to keep warm. You stand at the heart of the city, on the Isle de la Cité, as if balanced between centuries. All around you, stone and water conspire to hold secrets older than memory. Above, the twin towers of Notre-Dame loom, their great bells silent but waiting, black shapes against the paling stars. In the square before the cathedral, a handful of beggars curl beneath cloaks or sacks of straw, their breath rising like ghostly offerings. A stray dog noses at scraps left from yesterday's market. Somewhere beyond the cloister walls, a monk is chanting matins, the sound so faint you could almost mistake it for the hum of the river. It is the hour before dawn, when dreams begin to fray but the day has not yet claimed its dominion. The cobblestones beneath your feet are slick with dew. Every step sends a shiver up through your boots. You feel the city's bones, the worn grooves carved by countless carts and pilgrims. Timbered houses lean toward each other over narrow lanes, their upper stories almost touching so that only a ribbon of sky shows between them. Wicker baskets hang from ropes outside windows, ready to be lowered for bread or wine once the stalls open. Doors are barred, shutters closed, yet a muffled cough or the cry of an infant leaks from within. Life never truly sleeps here, it only folds itself into shadows. You move toward the Petit Pont, the smaller of the bridges leading off the island. The Seine glimmers like beaten pewter. On the far bank, the dark mass of the left bank's university quarter rises. Somewhere over there, scholars lie awake by candlelight, scratching notes into parchment, debating Aristotle in whispered Latin. You imagine the scent of ink and the crackle of vellum even here, across the water. Behind you, to the north, the Grand Pont points toward the bustling Les Halles. By mid-morning the cries of merchants and the clang of iron scales will drown out the bells themselves, but now there is only a hush as the city gathers its strength. A watchman passes, nodding to you. His hood shadows his face but you catch the gleam of his eyes, suspicious yet weary. All's quiet, he murmurs, more to himself than to you, and disappears into the fog. From somewhere in the warren of streets a rooster crows, its call ragged but defiant. The sound echoes off the stone like a signal, the night is loosening its hold, soon fishmongers will haul buckets from the river, their boots sloshing through the shallows. Soon, the city will inhale and lift its head. You pause near the edge of the quay, looking down at the river. Bits of driftwood and straw swirl past, traces of yesterday's labors. In the distance a barge slides under the arches of the Grand Pont, its sail furled, two figures at the poles guiding it silently along. A faint scent of roasting chestnuts wafts from somewhere unseen, a lone vendor already awake to catch the first hungry souls. Above it all, the cathedral stands like a sentinel, its gargoyles staring down at you with blank stone eyes. As you walk, you can almost hear the heartbeat of the city, not a sound exactly, but a rhythm, the weight of thousands of lives layered upon one another. In this hour you are not a tourist or a distant observer, you are a thread woven into the fabric. The silence around you is not empty but full of anticipation. The wooden beams creak, the river sighs, the towers wait. Soon a bell will ring, and Paris will wake. You pass under an archway where a shrine to Saint Denis flickers with a single candle. Someone has left a sprig of rosemary and a copper coin on the stone ledge. The scent of the herb cuts through the dampness, clean and sharp. You breathe it in and think of the prayers whispered here, of the hopes hung like lanterns in the dark. This is the city before the noise, before the crush, a city of whispers, footsteps, and breath. A city holding its secrets in the folds of night, ready to spill them as the sun rises. And then, at last, a faint paling of the eastern sky. A strip of pale gold slides along the horizon beyond the rooftops. The towers catch it first, their edges glinting. One bell, far away, begins to toll prime, its sound deep and deliberate, rolling across the river like a wave. Another bell answers from across the city, and another. The echoes overlap, a braided sound that seems to awaken the very stones beneath your feet. Paris is stirring. You draw your cloak tighter and step forward, ready to walk deeper into the day. As the first bells fade, other sounds begin to bloom like shy flowers. A cart's wheels creak somewhere up the Rue de la Barillerie. A mule brays, a child's thin laughter floats down from a garret window where someone is already awake. You follow a narrow alley that twists between timber-framed houses, the upper stories leaning so close their eaves brush. Rainwater drips from carved beams into a puddle where a cat laps noiselessly. The smell shifts as you go: damp wood, tallow from last night's candles, the faint tang of coal smoke seeping from a baker's flue. Paris is beginning its daily alchemy of odors. Ahead, a wooden door bangs open and a young apprentice stumbles out, still tying the leather apron at his waist. His master's shop behind him is still dark, but you glimpse the shapes of tools hung on pegs and a half-finished barrel waiting for iron hoops. He disappears down the lane, his clogs clattering a rhythm that echoes between the houses until it is swallowed by the city's soft murmur. You emerge into a slightly wider street, one of the arteries feeding into the cathedral square. Here the stones are slick with straw and horse droppings, the air feels heavier, as though it remembers yesterday's crowd. Under the arch of a small bridge, two beggars huddle and share a crust of bread. They look up at you with wary eyes but say nothing, and you keep walking, your breath misting before you. A painted sign above a doorway creaks in the breeze, its image of a golden swan fading with age. This will be an inn later today, full of wine-smelling merchants and the buzz of dice cups, but at this hour it feels like an abandoned stage waiting for actors. On a nearby wall a parchment notice flaps. You pause to read, an edict from the Brevet banning street gambling after sunset, the ink still wet. Someone has already scratched a rude comment into the margin with a knife tip. A small rat scuttles along the base of the wall, dragging a strip of cloth like a trophy. You glance back toward the river. The sky is deepening from gray to pale rose, the city's bones are showing through its dream skin. Another bell rings, this one nearer, sharper, its notes climbing like a stairway. It draws you toward the cathedral itself. The square has begun to fill with early risers, a woman with a basket of herbs tied in neat bundles, a porter carrying a sack of flour on his back, his knees bent like an ox's, a novice monk shepherding two sleepy choirboys. Everyone moves with the slow, deliberate pace of people accustomed to the city's rhythms. You join the flow, your boots crunching on grit scattered to keep the stones from icing. As you draw near the great doors, you catch sight of the gargoyles again, now more than silhouettes. In the new light they reveal chipped fangs, wings slick with rain. One has a pigeon perched between its horns, preening. The towers rise impossibly high above you, a forest of carved saints and monsters. You think of how many generations have stared up at these same stones, how many feet have worn these same steps. Even in your own time, centuries later, you would stand here and feel the same tightening in your chest. The past is not gone, it breathes with you in this hour before the city wakes. A priest passes, swinging a small censer that leaves a thin trail of frankincense. The smell mingles with the damp air, heady and almost sweet. He nods to you but does not slow. Behind him, a vendor sets up a small table with wooden cups of warm spiced wine for those coming out of. The morning has many streets yet. Crossing the square, you head toward the far side of the island where the narrow lanes of the Rue de la Vieille Draperie run. Here the cloth merchants will soon unbolt their shutters, spilling color into the grey dawn reds and blues from Flanders, deep greens from Italy. Already you can smell the lanolin and the sharp dyes stored in barrels. A boy is sweeping the threshold of one shop with a twig broom, each stroke releasing a puff of dust that glitters in the first sunbeam. He hums a snatch of a tune about Saint Martin and his cloak. You recognize it from another time, another square, and smile. As the light grows, so too does the noise. Carts rattle over bridges, geese honk from wicker pens, a smith's hammer begins its ringing, faint but insistent. The city is no longer only a backdrop, it is an instrument warming up for a day-long symphony. And you, walking through it, are part of the overture, the hush before the melody swells. You pass under a low arch where a sign shows a painted moon and star, an apothecary. Its door is ajar and you catch the scent of rosemary, lavender, and vinegar. Inside, a thin man grinds something in a mortar, his sleeves rolled up. He glances at you and then back to his work, lips moving silently as if reciting a formula. You emerge again onto the quay, where the Seine is brighter now, catching shards of light from the new sun. Fishermen haul in their nets, one whistles a tune that carries across the water. A barge laden with firewood slides past, its crew wrapped in cloaks. A dog runs along the bank, barking, its paws scattering gulls into the air. Across the river, the university quarter is awake, you can hear the distant toll of a college bell, the answering call of a student singing out a window. The air smells of bread baking, fish brine, and the sharp scent of damp stone warming under sunlight. You stop to watch the scene unfold, feeling as if you are standing at the edge of a great tapestry that is being woven in real time. Every thread, every sound, every smell, every face is part of the pattern. You sense the day stretching ahead, filled with markets and processions, with scholars and thieves, with the soft velvet of hidden chapels and the rough burlap of the poor. This is Paris before the day, but already it is alive. And you are here to walk its streets. The bells have finished their dialogue, and now the city begins to sing. You leave the quay and slip into another lane, narrower and darker, where laundry lines crisscross overhead like the rigging of ships. Damp shirts sway above you, dripping last night's rain onto your shoulders. A woman leans from a window to beat a rug, her blows sending motes of dust spiraling down in the beam of the rising sun. She glances at you briefly, then retreats, the window shutter closing with a muffled clap. Ahead, the street opens. A handful of women are gathered with earthen jugs, their shawls pulled up against the chill. They speak in low voices, occasionally laughing, their words half Latin, half Old French, the living dialect of medieval Paris. A barefoot boy runs circles around the fountain, chasing a hoop. The sound of his wooden toy rattles against the stones. A dog lies nearby, muzzles on its paws, tail thumping once as you pass. On the other side of the square a baker's shop yawns open. Warmth spills into the cold street. The smell of fresh bread is a sudden, tangible comfort, yeast, crust, the faint sweetness of honey. Inside you glimpse rows of round loaves cooling on slatted shelves. The baker himself, flower in his beard, leans on his paddle and greets his first customer, a nun from the convent down the road. She sets a few copper coins on the counter and lifts the bread to her nose, inhaling as if it were a prayer. For a moment you want to follow her, to see where she goes, but the street is already drawing you onward. As you walk, the buildings seem to tilt, their upper stories closing in like gossiping neighbors. Carved wooden brackets jut out at eye level, angels, lions, grimacing faces worn smooth by centuries of rain. In a doorway an old man sits with a basket of wooden spoons for sale. He nods at you, his eyes milky but alert, and mutters a blessing. You drop a small coin into his hand and he presses a spoon on you in return. Its handle is crudely carved with a cross. You slip it into your cloak pocket, a tiny relic of this dawn. The street climbs gently toward the eastern edge of the island. Here the air carries a tang of fish and riverweed. Stalls are being set up under awnings, nets, eels, bundles of herbs, candles, copper pots. Voices rise, arguing over space, calling out greetings. The market hasn't begun but it is already alive. A fiddler tunes his instrument on a low stool. A peddler arranges rows of glass beads that glint like trapped light. You pause, letting the colors and sounds wash over you. For a moment you feel you have stepped inside a manuscript illumination, one of those tiny crowded scenes in the margins where life teems unnoticed around the saints. Beyond the market, at the very tip of the island, stands a small chapel. Its wooden door is open, a single candle flickering inside. You step to the threshold and peer in. The floor is rough stone, the walls smell of damp and beeswax. A young priest kneels before the altar, his lips moving in silent prayer. Light filters through a tiny stained glass window depicting Saint Denis holding his severed head. The colors cast onto the wall, ruby, emerald, sapphire, seem more alive than paint. You stand in the doorway without entering, sensing smoke rises from chimneys in lazy spirals. You can hear the first bells of the university's morning lecture, a peal of bright notes. Somewhere a cock crows, absurdly late. The smell of horse sweat drifts from a nearby stable, mingling with the perfume of baking bread and river mist. All the senses layer upon one another until the moment feels almost too full, like a cup brimming. You begin to walk again, your boots striking the rhythm of the city's awakening. A merchant with a fur collar hurries past, his servant trailing behind with a ledger and a bundle of rolled cloth. A group of pilgrims clusters at a street corner, adjusting their packs, the scallop shells on their hats catching the sun. A gray cat perches on a barrel, tail twitching, watching a mousehole. Life at every scale is in motion, each piece part of a larger choreography that only Paris seems to know. The lane curves and you find yourself back near the cathedral square, now transformed. The steps are crowded with beggars, hawkers, travelers, the great doors stand open like the mouth of a cave. Incense drifts out, carrying a low hum of chant. Above, the gargoyles grin down at the crowd, guardians and mockers at once. You pause at the edge of the square, taking in the scene, the swirl of colors, the crush of bodies, the sound of hoofbeats and bells, the smell of wax and sweat and stone. This is not simply a city waking, it is a stage where every morning the play begins anew. And you, anonymous yet attentive, are allowed to wander through its opening act. Each street is a sentence, each sound a syllable. The narrative of Paris writes itself around you, and you step lightly so as not to disturb the ink. Ahead, the day stretches like a long scroll, waiting to be unrolled. Markets, bridges, palaces, taverns, cloisters all lie ahead, shimmering just beyond the next turning. But for now, in this first chapter of your walk, you stand at the threshold of medieval Paris as it exhales its night and draws in its morning breath. Chapter 2: Crossing the Bridges. The square before Notre-Dame is now fully awake. The low sun strikes the towers and the statues at the west front glow as though lit from within. Traders and pilgrims jostle for space at the foot of the steps, hawkers cry out their wares, candles, amulets, ribbons, and the smell of incense and hot spiced wine drifts across the cobbles. Beyond all this noise you hear the steady murmur of the Seine. It pulls you like a voice, and you turn away from the cathedral and walk toward the river. A narrow street spills you out at the edge of the island. The houses here are built almost over the water, their lower timbers dark and slick with moss. Laundry flaps from windows, gulls will and cry above. Ahead, the great timber bridge the Petit Pont arches toward the left bank. Its deck is. You step onto the bridge and the smell of the Seine rises up, mingled with the odor of fish stalls and frying oil. Underfoot the planks creak, through gaps you glimpse the greenish current sliding below. The first booth you pass sells wax tablets and quills. A boy no older than 10 sits on a stool, carving little wooden crucifixes with a knife. Next door a woman roasts river fish over a brazier, handing them to travelers wrapped in leaves. Steam rises into the cold air, catching the sunlight like smoke. You pause for a moment to watch a barber at work. His stall is no larger than a cupboard, but he has set up a chair, a mirror, and a row of shining razors. A pilgrim kneels as he trims his hair to a neat tonsure. The barber's assistant empties a basin of water straight into the river below. The bridge narrows as you walk. Wagons rattle past, iron-bound wheels thudding on the planks. Horses snort and toss their heads, apprentices carry bundles of cloth, books, barrels of wine. It feels less like a crossing than a street in motion, the whole city squeezed into a wooden span. Through it all the Seine slides underneath, slow and green and inexorable, as it has for centuries. You stop at a gap in the booths and lean on the railing. The river catches the light like beaten metal. On its far side the left bank glows, promising new sights, the university quarter, gardens, taverns, churches. You can hear faint bells from the Sorbonne mingling with the bridge's din. Halfway across you come to a little shrine set into the bridge, a painted Madonna behind glass, her face rubbed pale where passers-by have touched it. A row of candles flickers at her feet, their wax pooled thick from countless prayers. You pause, watching a boatman make the sign of the cross as he goes by below, his barge stacked with barrels. Above, a flock of pigeons wheels suddenly, scattering crumbs of sound. For a moment everything, the river, the crowd, the bells, seems to move to the same rhythm. You walk on. The booths thin out and the end of the bridge opens before you like a doorway. Beyond it lies a different Paris, the left bank with its scholars, its abbeys, its gardens and narrow lanes. Here the smell of parchment and ink replaces that of fish and incense. Here you hear Latin phrases thrown back and forth between students in threadbare cloaks. The towers of Saint Julien-le-Pauvre rise to your left, to your right, the long roof of the Hôtel Dieu hospital stretches along the river. You have crossed not only water but worlds from the sacred island heart of the city into its restless, questioning mind. You pause at the foot of the bridge. Behind you, the twin towers of Notre-Dame rise above the market like watchful giants. Before you, the warren of lanes beckons. Somewhere ahead a bell rings the hour for the first lectures. A donkey brays, a student laughs too loudly, the scent of baking bread from a university refectory drifts on the wind. The day is fully born now, and your walk continues. You step off the last plank of the Petit Pont and into a web of lanes so tight that the sky seems to have been cut into ribbons above you. The noise changes instantly, the roar of the bridge fades, replaced by a polyphony of hammering, chanting, and the crackle of fire from blacksmiths' forges. This is the Rue de la Boucherie, the bookseller's street, and you move slowly so as not to miss anything. On either side shop signs swing on iron brackets, quills and ink bottles painted in blue and gold, a dancing bear, a tiny lamb, a red lion. Beneath the signs, real people lean out to call their wares, illuminated manuscripts copied in a student's careful hand, scraps of parchment for notes, rosaries strung with wooden beads. The smell of tanned leather and ink fills the air. In one open doorway a copyist sits at a slanted desk, his quill whispering across the vellum. Candle stubs burn at his elbow though the morning is bright, so he can see each letter's shadow. On a bench beside him lie finished pages drying like white sails. You pause, drawn by the rhythm of his strokes, the way he tilts his head and mutters as though speaking to the page itself. Outside, a girl about 12 holds up a tray of fresh bread for sale to passing scholars. You buy a small loaf and break it as you walk, the crust warm, scattering crumbs on the cobbles for the sparrows. The street dips and bends toward the river again, and suddenly the houses fall away to reveal the Petit Châtelet gate. Built of grey stone and timber, it straddles the road like a sentinel, its portcullis raised, its towers bristling with narrow slits. Beyond it lies Petit Pont's twin, the Grand Pont, leading back to the right bank. But you turn south instead, toward the heart of the university. A group of students sweeps past you in a blur of cloaks and rolled parchments, their Latin arguments spilling over you like a stream. One gestures fiercely at the sky, another shrugs. Their debate is about Aristotle, but their laughter is pure youth. You follow them up a narrow lane to the Place Maubert. Here, under a plane tree, an old man sells astrolabes and compasses, their brass shining like small suns. Beside him a tooth drawer advertises his trade with a wooden sign carved into the shape of a molar. It swings in the breeze, squealing on its nail. A boy beats a drum to attract attention to a miracle play to be performed later on a makeshift stage of planks and barrels. Everything seems temporary and eternal at once, like a fairground built on ancient stones. Crossing the square, you glimpse the Seine again through a break in the houses. A barge drifts past, its mast lowered to fit under the bridges, its deck crowded with bales of wool and barrels of wine from Burgundy. The boatman waves, and for a moment you feel the tug of travel, the idea that you could step aboard and be carried out of the city, downriver to Rouen and the sea. But the current of the street carries you on. You pass under an archway where water drips steadily from a carved lion's mouth into a stone trough. Horses drink there, steam rising from their flanks in the cool air. The lanes grow quieter as you climb a slight rise. Ahead, the grey bulk of the Collège de Sorbonne looms, its chapel bell ringing for lecture. Students in black robes hurry inside, some still chewing bread, others clutching books bound in rough leather. The smell here is of wet stone and old paper. You catch a snatch of chant from the chapel, then the low drone of a master's voice echoing out of a high window. This is the other side of Paris from the markets and shrines, a city of ideas, where words and symbols matter as much as bread and fish. At the top of the rise you turn to look back. From here you can see the river flashing between rooftops, the twin bridges like ribs crossing its back. The towers of Notre-Dame stand dark against the sky, and beyond them, faint and golden, the spire of Sainte-Chapelle. It feels as though you have walked not only across the Seine but across a threshold of time. The left bank hums with a different energy, not quieter but deeper, as if beneath every street flows a current of learning, argument, and quiet revolution. You begin to walk again, deeper into the labyrinth, the sound of your own steps mingling with the city's. A street sweeper clears a gutter with a bundle of twigs, a cat leaps from one window to another above your head. The air smells of damp earth and frying onions. Bells mark the hour. Somewhere nearby, unseen, the river keeps on moving, holding the city's reflections like a mirror. And you, walking its bridges and lanes, become part of that reflection, a single figure crossing a living tapestry of stone and water. You keep walking, letting the tide of Paris carry you. The lanes pinch inward, then flare into sudden open spaces like pools in a stream. At one bend a baker pushes open his shutters and a rush of warm air rolls out, thick with the smell of honey and rye. His wife dusts the window ledge with flour and calls to a passing student, offering a heel of bread. He bows, pockets it, and hurries on. Everywhere you look are gestures like these small, human exchanges that knit the city together like a tapestry. Ahead the lane drops toward another quay. Between two tall, leaning houses you glimpse the river again, this time a wide, glittering sheet of pewter under the late morning sun. You emerge into a square called the Place du Change, where money changers sit behind wooden counters counting coins into neat piles. Their fingers are stained green with copper dust. A beggar crouches at the base of a stone pillar, singing a psalm for alms. The crowd here is thicker, voices rising and falling like surf. You push through slowly, noting the glint of daggers at some men's belts, the flash of velvet on others' sleeves. This is a meeting place of worlds, merchants from Bruges and Lubeck, friars from Italy, Breton sailors with salt still crusting their boots. The bridge beyond the square is older and heavier than the Petit Pont, the Grand Pont, lined on both sides with houses and shops perched precariously over the water. You step onto it and feel the planks tremble under the weight of carts. Here the smell of the river mixes with tallow, fish, and iron. Shop fronts crowd you so tightly you cannot see the view except through narrow windows between them, a flash of water, a sweep of sky, the slow passing of a barge. A barber works in full view of the street, scraping a man's chin while a crowd waits for their turn. Next door a woman sells ink and paper to travelers who want to write home before the tide carries them onward. Halfway across you pause at a gap between buildings. The Seine spreads out beneath you, broad and calm, carrying bits of straw and the reflection of clouds. On the far bank the city seems to rise in terraces, more roofs, more spires, and behind them fields and woods. A hawk circles high above, a speck of dark against the light. For a moment you rest your elbows on the wooden rail and simply breathe, tasting the damp in the air, listening to the creak and groan of the bridge. Around you the crowd surges, but you feel suspended between worlds, water below, sky above, the pulse of the city all around. You continue on, reaching the right bank once more. Here the tone shifts again. The streets are broader, the houses taller, the commerce brisker. This is the merchant's quarter, where bales of cloth are hoisted from carts, where spices and tin, salt and silk change hands. You pass a row of warehouses whose doors stand open like mouths. Inside, men heave sacks onto their shoulders, shouting in a dozen accents. A dog barks at a mule that refuses to move. The smell is sharper here, pepper, tar, sweat. You slip into a narrower alley to escape the crush. This one runs parallel to the river and ends in a small courtyard shaded by a chestnut tree. A fountain trickles into a stone basin. Two washerwomen kneel there beating linen against the edge, their sleeves rolled high, their laughter echoing off the walls. They look up and nod as you pass, then go back to their rhythm, slap, twist, rinse. A cat watches from the tree, tail twitching. Beyond the courtyard you find yet another bridge, a modest wooden span leading to a tiny island. It is nothing more than a handful of gardens, and on the opposite bank you can see the towers of the Louvre rising, not yet the palace of kings we imagine, but a fortress with thick walls and narrow windows. As you sit, the bells of Notre-Dame toll the noon hour behind you, their deep notes rolling across the water. Traders pause in their work, making the sign of the cross, students close their books, a barge's crew bows their heads. Time seems to ripple outward from those bells, touching every soul in earshot. You realize you have been walking for hours, but the city keeps unfolding, each bridge a new threshold, each street another chapter. The bridges are more than crossings, they are arteries of a living body, carrying its lifeblood back and forth, binding its parts together. You rise and begin walking again, back toward the main streets, letting the flow of people pull you north. The smell of roasting chestnuts drifts from a brazier, a juggler tosses 3 wooden balls in an arc as children squeal. A priest hurries past clutching a box of relics. The city feels at once immense and intimate, like a maze built of stories. As you cross yet another small footbridge you glance down and see your reflection blurred in the current, walking beside you, vanishing beneath each ripple. And with that image in your mind you, the stranger, the walker of bridges, you step off onto solid ground again, ready for whatever corner of medieval Paris opens next. Chapter 3 Into the Market Streets. The sound of the bells fades behind you as you drift back into the web of lanes. Ahead rises a smell thicker and more complicated than any you've met yet, a rolling blend of warm bread, iron nails, smoked meat, wax, dung, and herbs. It pulls you forward the way the river pulls a boat. The city's market district, the living stomach of medieval Paris, lies ahead like a beating heart. You turn a corner and the street widens abruptly into a square dense with people. It is as though an entire village has spilled into the city, peasants with baskets of onions, women with aprons full of eggs, traders from distant provinces leading donkeys laden with cloth. The cobbles are damp and speckled with straw. Geese hiss at your boots as they're herded toward a pen. Overhead, lines of laundry crisscross the sky like banners, fluttering in a breeze heavy with the smell of roasting fish. At the far edge of the square, timbered buildings lean toward one another, their upper stories almost touching. Under their shadow are stalls of every imaginable craft, a copper fitting iron hoops to a barrel, a scribe writing letters for illiterate customers, a girl selling ribbons of indigo and scarlet. The noise is constant, hammers on wood, knives on stone, a fiddler playing for coins, the murmur of 100 bargains. Every few steps someone calls out an offer, fresh eels from the Seine, wool from Flanders, candles blessed at Saint-Germain. You pause at a stall where a spice merchant from the Levant has arranged little pyramids of saffron, pepper, and cinnamon in glazed bowls. The air above them is hot with fragrance. He lifts a pinch of something green to your nose, dried mint, sharp and clean, and gestures for you to taste. Around him a knot of onlookers gawks at tiny packets of powders they've never seen before. Coins clink, hands trade goods, and the merchant's dark eyes gleam with satisfaction. Moving deeper into the district, you find the butcher's row. Hooks gleam under a canopy, bearing sides of mutton and whole pigs. A boy carries an offal in a bucket to feed the dogs. The smell here is heavy, but the butchers work briskly, knives flashing, jokes flying. Next door the fishmongers shout about their catch, the tables heaped with eels still twisting faintly. Children dart between the stalls, snatching apple cores and bits of bread. You duck down a side alley where the noise softens. Here the craft guilds keep their own shops, a row of shoemakers, then a row of tinkers repairing pots, then a booth of parchment sellers displaying skins stretched taut and pale. A copyist sits on a stool, his tongue between his teeth as he draws the first letter of an illuminated page. Behind him a young apprentice grinds pigments into powder, mixing lapis into a bowl of egg white until it shines like the summer sky. Even in this back lane the city's pulse beats steady. At the market center stands a covered hall of less hallies, the great central market. Its arches are dark with soot and its floor slick with spilled wine and melted ice. Inside, under the echoing roof, merchants from all over Christendom shout over one another. You step beneath the archway and the sound swells around you, layered and immense. Above, pigeons roost in the beams. A ray of sun slips through a high window and strikes a pile of oranges until they glow like coins. You drift from booth to booth, tasting, smelling, listening. A baker presses a warm crust into your hands, a perfumer lifts a vial to your wrist, a tinkling bell announces a juggler's act. Everywhere you sense not just commerce but exchange of stories, songs, ideas. This is the true Parliament of Paris, more than any council chamber. Here a pilgrim from Santiago trades gossip with a student from Oxford, a widow haggles with a cloth merchant over a bolt of wool, a group of boys argue about which saint is most powerful while they chew on honey cakes. At the far end of the hall you step out into sunlight again. Before you stretch another square, this one ringed with taverns whose signs creak in the wind, the Swan, the Golden Harp, the Three Kings. Music spills from open doors, mingling with the clatter of hooves and the scent of ale. A troupe of acrobats performs on a makeshift stage, tumbling and leaping as a crowd tosses. Stand for a moment at the edge of it all, letting the movement swirl around you. The bells of Notre-Dame are only a murmur now, but a new rhythm has taken over, the beat of hammers, the clap of hooves, the rise and fall of human voices trading, teasing, singing. The market is not just a place but an organism, alive and shifting, and you are in its bloodstream. You move further along the edge of the square, past the taverns and into the narrower lanes that lace behind them. Here the stalls give way to workshops built right into the ground floors of houses. Each doorway opens like a miniature theater, a smith hammering out a hinge, sparks dancing onto the street, a hatmaker shaping felt over a wooden form, a candlemaker dipping wicks into vats of tallow, the waxy smell blending with wood smoke. It is as if the entire quarter is one vast organism, each trade a beating chamber in the city's heart. A shoemaker waves you in. His bench is crowded with lasts, leather scraps curling like shavings of bark. He holds up a half-finished boot, the stitching as neat as a rosary, and explains how he learned his craft from his father and his father before him. In the corner, a thin boy polishes brass buckles until they gleam. Outside, a customer waits, foot on a stool, while the shoemaker's wife measures him with a string. It is the rhythm of medieval life, skill passed hand to hand, time slowed to the pace of stitches. Back on the street, the smell changes. You have entered the apothecary's row. Shelves line the doorways, filled with jars of dried herbs, roots, and powders. The air is resinous, sweet with frankincense, sharp with vinegar. A gray-bearded man in a red cap offers a vial of something he claims will ease fevers. Beside him a younger woman is grinding rose petals into paste, her fingers stained pink. She smiles as you pass, the pestle making a steady heartbeat against the mortar. Around the corner a small square opens, the stones worn smooth by countless feet. In its center stands a public fountain where women draw water, gossiping as they fill their pails. Children chase one another around the base, splashing. The fountain itself is carved with saints and lions, their faces worn but still expressive. Above, a balcony is hung with freshly dyed cloth, dripping rivulets of color onto the cobbles. A dog lies in the sun, tail thumping. Drawn by music, you slip down a side street that smells of roasting nuts. At its end a minstrel and his companions have gathered an impromptu crowd. A lute twangs, a small drum keeps time, and a high voice sings of Charlemagne's knights. The people sway and laugh, some throwing coins into a wooden bowl. For a moment the street becomes a stage, even the merchants pause at their work to listen. Stories, you realize, are as much a currency here as silver or salt. Deeper still, you find the bird market. A boy holds out a falcon's jest for you to touch, the bird's eyes like drops of molten gold. Nearby a woman sells tiny songbirds to hang in windows. The sound is a tapestry of chirps and trills, a bright counterpoint to the low human murmur. Above, a shred of blue sky shows between the roofs like a promise. Past the birds, the street narrows until only one person can pass at a time. Here the tanners work. Strips of hide hang from beams, dripping into tubs of dark liquid. The smell is strong enough to make you blink, but the workers go about their task steadily, stirring vats with long poles, stretching skins on frames. This is the city's underbelly, necessary and unglamorous. Yet even here you glimpse skill, a worker checking a hide's thickness with practiced fingers, another mixing a dye from crushed bark and water. You emerge at last into a sunlit arcade lined with stone columns. Merchants from distant lands have set up here. Italians selling glass beads that catch the light like drops of rain, Flemings with bolts of fine wool, a Moorish trader displaying brass lamps and inlaid boxes. They haggle in many tongues, but laughter is the universal language. A group of scholars from the university pauses to finger a book of Arabic astronomy, their faces alight with curiosity. At the arcade's end stands a small chapel open to the street. People slip inside for a moment's prayer before returning to their buying and selling. Candles flicker on the altar, and the smell of incense drifts out to mingle with that of spices and horses. You step inside briefly, the sudden quiet like plunging into cool water. A priest murmurs a blessing over a merchant's sick child, a beggar kneels at the door. Outside, the market surges on. When you step back into the daylight the afternoon sun has shifted, throwing long stripes of shadow across the square. The crowd is thicker now, the clamor louder. Vendors shout last-minute deals, apprentices hurry with baskets, and carters jostle for space. A troupe of jugglers appears, tossing knives in the air to a roar of approval. Somewhere a bell rings for vespers, but few pause. Commerce has its own hours. You find a bench beneath an elm and sit for a moment, absorbing it all. The smell of baking bread drifts from a tavern, mingling with the tang of horse sweat and the sweetness of candied fruit. A boy offers you a cup of watered wine for a penny. You drink and watch as a wedding party crosses the square, their garments bright against the stone, a fiddler leading them toward the church. Life in the market is not just buying and selling but a theater of the city's hopes, sorrows, and celebrations. The sun slants lower, gilding the roofs. You realize you have walked for hours yet seen only a fraction of this labyrinth. Beyond the next corner lie more lanes, more trades, more stories waiting to be discovered. You rise from the bench, ready to step back into the current. Chapter 3 Into the Market Streets. You rise from the bench and let yourself be carried along by the stream of people toward a darker arcade where the sun rarely penetrates. Here the roofs nearly meet overhead, and the street feels like a corridor. Lanterns swing on iron hooks, their light catches the damp sheen of stone and the glint of coins changing hands. The voices are lower, the gestures subtler. This is the quarter of rarities and secrets. On your left a goldsmith works behind a barred window. Inside, tiny hammers tap with clockwork precision as apprentices set stones into rings no bigger than a fingernail. A priest leans in to commission a reliquary, his voice drops to a whisper as the goldsmith sketches on a wax tablet. Next door, a scribe bends over a manuscript, his quill scratching on vellum. A boy mixes pigments from crushed minerals, the powders dazzling in little shells. Lapis blue, malachite green, cinnabar red. Even in this world of commerce there is an undercurrent of devotion to craft, each movement rehearsed like a prayer. Beyond the goldsmith you catch a whiff of something sweet and foreign. A spice dealer from the Levant gestures toward cones of sugar stacked like small towers, cinnamon curled like bark from another world, pepper grains black and glossy as jet. He speaks a French salted with Arabic, his apprentice measures out a pinch of saffron as though it were gold. Housewives stop to stare at the colors, a cook from a noble household haggles for a measure of ginger to impress his lord. At the end of the arcade the street flares open again, but not into another square, this time into a covered hall of timber beams blackened by centuries of smoke. This is the meat market. The smell hits you first, iron, salt, and fire. Hooks hold cuts of beef and mutton, sausages coil like snakes, and butchers in leather aprons wield cleavers with practiced ease. Dogs skulk under the tables waiting for scraps. A monk counts coins as he buys salted pork for his monastery, while a soldier chews a strip of dried meat and laughs with the vendor. Out the back of the hall a small lane leads to the river where barrels are rolled down to boats. You follow it and find yourself in a tangle of ropes, crates, and gulls. The river smells like mud, water, and tar. It is a relief after the heaviness of the meat hall. A woman demonstrates how a new dye holds its color when washed. An old man shows off a pattern of embroidery copied from a crusader's cloak. Here business is brisk but almost scholarly, buyers fingering the texture as if reading a script. Suddenly a commotion breaks out ahead. You push forward to see a juggler standing on a cart, tossing torches into the air while his partner balances on stilts. Children squeal with delight, even the city watch pauses. It's not unusual for entertainers rove the markets like blood through veins, but in the dusty light and rising smoke the performance takes on the feel of a ritual. Coins rain into a hat. When they finish, the crowd disperses with smiles, the everyday weight of barter lightened for a moment. You drift again toward the outer edge of the district. Here are the poulterers with cages of geese, chickens, and peacocks, the potters with stacks of glazed bowls, the glove makers with lines of soft leather. The sound is constant. Hammers, saws, bells, laughter, bargaining. Every few steps you catch a new story, a merchant bragging about a journey to Burgundy, a pilgrim telling of a shrine, a runaway apprentice whispering his plans. The market is a living chronicle of ambitions and failures, woven from countless small voices. As you reach a small triangular plaza, you notice a raised platform with a clerk reading out new ordinances from the city council. The crowd murmurs. Taxes will change, weights must be standardized, a new bridge will be built. This too is part of the market's pulse, information, regulation, and the thin line between order and chaos. A group of beggars clusters nearby, bowls outstretched. A lady in fine dress drops coins and moves on, her scent of rosewater lingering after her. To one side of the plaza stands a tavern with an open gallery. You climb the stairs for a better view. From up here the market spreads like a tapestry. Stalls, colors, gestures, smells, and sounds blending into one living pattern. Bells toll the hour from several churches at once, each note echoing off stone. Smoke rises from cooking fires. Horses snort. In the distance you glimpse the towers of Notre-Dame. The city's heart beats all around you, and you are inside it. Leaning on the rail, you sip a cup of watered wine and let your senses drink it in. Below, an old storyteller begins reciting a fable to a circle of listeners, his voice rolling like a drum. You catch only fragments, knights, tricksters, miracles, but the rhythm is hypnotic. Even here, amid commerce, the story binds the crowd together. This, you think, is medieval Paris at its truest, not only stone and trade, but people, voices, and tales interlaced. The sun is sliding west now, gilding the roofs and throwing long shadows across the square. Vendors are packing up, calling out last bargains. A group of novices from the university crosses the square debating in Latin. A nun leads orphans by the hand. The market is closing, but the city is not. Its life will move to taverns, churches, and homes as evening comes. You descend from the gallery and step once more into the crowd, feeling the texture of the day settling on your skin like fine dust. You have walked from fish to spices, from gold to wool, from sunlight to shadow and back. You have seen not only wares but lives, the boy polishing buckles, the woman grinding rose petals, the bargemen unloading wine, the jugglers tossing fire. Each a fragment of the whole. Each a beat in the city's long, unending rhythm. As you head toward the next district, the noise fades slightly behind you. Ahead another street opens, promising new smells, new faces, new stories. You realize that you could wander these markets for days and still not exhaust them. The medieval city is a labyrinth, but a welcoming one. It wants to be walked, smelled, listened to, learned. You breathe in deeply, adjust your cloak, and step forward, ready to cross into the next chapter of its living heart. Chapter 4 at the Cathedral Square. Leaving the clamor of the market behind you feels like stepping out of a river into still air. The lane narrows, turns beneath a low archway, and then suddenly you're released into a vast, sun-splashed expanse. Stone flags spread out beneath your boots like a gray sea, worn smooth by centuries of feet. Ahead, rising like a mountain of carved lace, the cathedral dominates the skyline. Its twin towers rise into a sky streaked with gulls, its facade bristles with saints, kings, gargoyles, and stories in stone. This is the heart of the city's soul, and as you emerge from the arteries of trade into its square, the mood shifts from barter to reverence. The air itself feels different here. Bells toll the hour, their notes rolling across the space and echoing off the surrounding houses. The smell of incense drifts faintly from the open doors, mixing with the scents of wax candles and damp stone. Pilgrims in travel-stained cloaks kneel on the steps. A child clutches a scallop shell badge, proof of a long journey. Sellers of little tin shrines and blessed tokens call softly to the newcomers, their voices lower and more respectful than the cries of the market. You realize that even commerce bows here, becoming quieter, more symbolic. You walk slowly toward the cathedral, letting your eyes trace the stories carved above the portals, angels weighing souls, beasts coiled in vines, kings standing like pillars. Every inch of the facade is a book in stone, and the people who cannot read still read it with their eyes and fingers. A blind man stands at the base, touching the carvings as though feeling the edge of a dream. Above him a row of grotesques leans out, tongues lolling, eyes wide, frozen mid-howl at the city below. Near the steps a group of beggars huddles, bowls extended. Some are genuinely poor, others are lepers whose faces bear the marks of disease. A friar moves among them distributing bread from a basket, murmuring blessings. Not far away a pardoner with a feathered cap hawks indulgences, promising absolution for a coin. Pilgrims cluster, uncertain whom to trust. The square is a theater of souls, piety and fraud, mercy and need, all mingling under the same ringing bells. To one side of the square stands a line of scribes offering to write letters for those who cannot. Their desks are simple boards laid over barrels, their pens scratch steadily as they transcribe confessions, wills, petitions to the bishop. Wax seals glint red in the sunlight. Next to them a bookseller displays illuminated psalters and small prayer books chained to his stand. A noblewoman runs a gloved finger over the painted initials, her eyes bright with wonder. As you drift along the edge of the square you notice processions arriving from different streets. One is a group of university students, their black robes swirling, chanting in Latin as they debate theology. Another is a band of flagellants, barebacked, carrying a wooden cross, their chants rising and falling like surf. People make way, some cross themselves, others watch with wary eyes. In a corner a troupe of musicians plays shawms and small drums, their melody threading through the solemn air like a silver ribbon. You climb the wide steps to the porch. From here you can look back over the square and see it as a living painting, merchants closing their stalls at the edges, pilgrims kneeling, children chasing pigeons, friars moving like dark birds among them. Beyond, the spires of other churches prick the sky, and the river glints in the distance. Paris stretches out in every direction, but here, at the foot of the cathedral, it seems to hold its breath. Inside, the gloom is cool and full of echoes. Your footsteps become whispers on the stone floor. Shafts of light fall through stained glass, casting patches of ruby, emerald, and sapphire on the pillars. Candles tremble like small stars. A choir rehearses somewhere beyond the screen, their voices rise and fall in waves, filling the nave with a sound older than the city itself. It is impossible not to slow down, not to let your own breath align with theirs. You wander along the side aisles, past altars where small groups kneel. Here a sailor leaves a model ship as an offering, there a mother presses her baby's hand to a relic. The scent of beeswax, incense, and damp stone mingles in your lungs. Statues of saints stand like sentinels, each with a story, each with a gaze both carved and alive. In the flickering light their faces seem to move. At the far end, near the choir, workmen are setting up scaffolding. Even the great church is never finished, masons chip away at new capitals, glaziers repair broken panes. The cathedral breathes as a living thing, always in the act of becoming. You catch the low murmur of their voices, the clink of chisels, the smell of fresh dust. When you step back into the square, the light has shifted. Late afternoon sun gilds the towers, shadows lengthen across the stones. The bells ring again, a deeper note this time, calling the faithful to vespers. People begin to stream inside, and the square fills with a hushed, expectant energy. You stand at the edge, watching the doors swallow them one by one, feeling for a moment as if you too are part of a tide flowing into eternity. At the perimeter of the square, inns and taverns glow with early lamps. Pilgrims who have finished their devotions turn to food and rest. A cook stirs a pot of stew that smells of wine and herbs. A storyteller in a bright hood gathers a small crowd under a lintel to recount miracles and marvels from distant shrines. Children press close, eyes wide. Even here, under the shadow of the cathedral, the human hunger for tale and company persists. You move slowly around the square's edge, taking in the interplay of sacred and everyday. You see an old woman selling wax votives shaped like limbs for healing prayers, a young man carving a rosary from bone, a scholar sketching the cathedral's facade in a notebook. Each is a different way of approaching the same mystery, a different language spoken under the same towers. As dusk deepens, the towers fade into silhouette, and the gargoyles become dark knots against the sky. The last of the vendors pack up, a sexton sweeps the steps. A flock of pigeons wheels overhead, their wings catching the last light like quicksilver. The bells toll once more, and the square seems to sigh. You draw your cloak tighter and step toward a side street where the smell of fresh bread drifts from a bakery. The day has carried you from market to cathedral, now the city will show you its evening face. Behind you the towers keep watch, the carved saints and demons frozen mid-gesture, the great doors closed until morning. Ahead lies another quarter, another thread in the tapestry. You walk on, your footsteps echoing off stone, carrying with you the glow of stained glass and the murmur of pilgrims. The cathedral recedes but its presence stays like a pulse in the background. Paris is not a single story but many, and you are still moving through them, listening. You slip down one of the narrower lanes that skirt the edge of the square, curious about what lies just beyond the familiar facade. The street is lined with small workshops whose shutters are thrown open to catch the late light. Here a stonemason chips at a block destined for a new chapel, there a glazier sets tiny triangles of colored glass into a lead frame. Their hands move with practiced ease, and they hardly glance up as you pass, but their world hums with the same devotion that fills the cathedral's nave. It is as though the city's heartbeat continues in these back alleys, every tap of the hammer another note in a long hymn. Further along you come to a little cloistered garden maintained by the canons. High walls block the noise of the square, and the sudden quiet feels like stepping into a hidden room. Herbs grow in neat beds, lavender, sage, rue releasing a soft fragrance when you brush them with your hand. A monk kneels, weeding, his cowl casting his face into shadow. He looks up only long enough to give you a small, gentle smile before returning to his task. Bees drift from blossom to blossom. In the distance you can still hear the bells, muted now by the walls, a reminder that even in stillness the city moves. Back in the open, the evening procession has begun. Clerics in embroidered vestments carry candles, the flame-light dances on gilt crosses and polished censers. Children scatter flower petals on the stones, their small voices piping a hymn. Townsfolk pause their errands to bow their heads or cross themselves as the procession winds past. You fall into step with the flow, not as a pilgrim exactly but as a witness, feeling the tide of faith and habit move around you like water. At one corner of the square, near a tall pillar, a preacher has gathered a crowd. His voice rises and falls with the drama of a play, warning of sin, promising salvation. His gestures carve the air, his eyes flash. Beside him a rival preacher mutters counterpoints, his own small knot of listeners leaning in. The arguments of heaven spill out into the street, as vivid as any market haggling. A boy climbs onto a barrel to see better, an old man nods as though hearing his own thoughts aloud. You move closer to the cathedral again, drawn by the sound of music from within. Through the great doors you glimpse the glow of 1,000 candles, the procession winding up the nave. Choirboys' voices soar above the drone of the organ, the notes spilling out into the square and mingling with the street noise until sacred and secular blur. For a moment the whole space, beggars and bishops, merchants and monks vibrates with the same tone. As twilight thickens, other figures emerge. A troupe of traveling players sets up a small stage at the square's edge, hammering in poles and stringing a painted cloth backdrop. Children gather instantly, their laughter bright. A juggler flips knives in the air, catching them with exaggerated bows. A girl in a striped dress balances on a rope, arms spread wide. Their performance will begin as soon as the Vespers end, a mirror world of saints and sinners acted out for coins. The smells of evening food creep into the square, bread fresh from an oven, onions frying in fat, spiced wine warming in a pot. Vendors will small carts laden with pastries, roasted nuts, and candied fruit. You buy a handful of hot chestnuts and feel their warmth through the paper. Around you pilgrims compare the day's sights, a group of artisans argue over the best mason at work on the nave, a pair of lovers slip into a shadowed doorway. The square holds them all, a stage on which countless small stories play out beneath the gaze of the carved saints. You pause to watch a candlemaker at his stall. He dips wicks into molten wax, one after another, his hands moving like a slow dance. Each taper glows pale gold, cooling in the evening air. He tells you which ones have been blessed, which burn longest, which to offer at which altar. His voice is low and patient, his eyes reflect the candlelight. When you thank him and move on, he nods once, already dipping the next wick. Near the western edge of the square you find a row of low buildings belonging to various guilds. Their doors stand open, showing glimpses of carved chests, painted banners, and the symbols of each craft. A group of apprentices sits on the steps of the weaver's hall, sharing bread and cheese. They greet you shyly, one daring to ask where you have traveled from. Their accents mark them as from different regions, drawn to the city by work or learning. The cathedral unites them too, its shadow falling across their faces. As the sky deepens to indigo, the first stars appear above the towers. Lanterns are lit one by one, casting warm pools of light on the stones. The gargoyles disappear into darkness, the saints glow faintly in the lantern glow. A cool breeze rises from the river, carrying with it the scent of water and tar from moored barges. The square breathes differently at night, its sound softer, its colors muted, its rhythm slower. You step toward the north transept where a small door stands ajar. Inside, a side chapel flickers with candlelight. A handful of worshippers kneel, their faces hidden by hoods. On the altar a reliquary gleams like a captured star. The hush is so deep you can hear the scrape of a pen as a priest writes in a ledger. When you leave again, the contrast of noise and air feels like waking from a dream. The cathedral's bells ring one last time, a low, rolling chord. People begin to disperse, some to the taverns at the square's edge, some to the hostels and hospitals for pilgrims. The player's stage bursts into life, a comic sketch of devils and angels, the crowd laughing and groaning at familiar jabs. The night belongs to them now, even as the church claims the day. You linger a moment, the laughter and bells mixing in your ears, the towers above like dark watchmen. You realize the square is a hinge in the life of the city, by day a place of devotion, by night a theater, always a meeting ground. The cathedral stands unchanged, but the human tide around it shifts hour by hour, carrying new faces, new hopes, new fears. When you finally step away from the square, heading toward a side street that promises another chapter of the city, you look back once. The towers are black silhouettes against a sky washed with stars. The last strains of the choir drift out like a blessing. Somewhere a lute begins to play in a tavern. The smell of bread and wine follows you into the narrow lane. As you press deeper into the quarter beyond the square, the lanes become a labyrinth of cloisters, courtyards, and tiny hostels catering to pilgrims. Wooden signs painted with scallop shells or little crosses swing above doors, creaking softly in the night breeze. Each doorway opens onto a different world, a low-lit room where a Breton family murmurs evening prayers, a hall lined with straw pallets where Gascon merchants snore, a dim refectory where a Franciscan offers broth to the hungry. The smell of straw, sweat, and wood smoke mingles with the faint perfume of incense drifting from the cathedral's open windows. You feel as though you are walking through a living reliquary, the city itself the container for countless acts of devotion and need. Down one narrow alley a copyist's workshop glows like a lantern. Inside, under a canopy of drying pages, young scribes bend over their desks. Their quills whisper across parchment as they illuminate saints' lives and royal charters, blue and red pigments gleaming in the candlelight. The master of the shop catches your eye and lifts a hand in greeting, his fingers stained with ink. Behind him, stacked neatly against the wall, you glimpse finished manuscripts bound in leather, their spines tooled with gold leaf. This is another cathedral, you think, a cathedral of words, and its bells are the scratch of quills. Back in the main square the jester's troupe has shifted from comedy to a morality play. Now actors in rough habits chant lines about a proud knight's fall and the mercy of the Virgin. Their painted masks catch the lamplight as they strut and kneel, and the crowd responds with gasps and murmurs. You notice how seamlessly sacred and profane are woven here, a sermon on sin delivered with slapstick gestures, a parody of a bishop's crozier followed by a sincere invocation of a saint. The city teaches by laughter as much as by liturgy. You pause at a stone trough where horses drink. Beside it a water seller ladles cups from a barrel and hands them to travelers. He tells you, without prompting, that his family has sold water here for 3 generations, that he has seen crusaders depart and queens pass by. His voice carries the slow rhythm of someone who has watched time bend around the cathedral's stones. You sip and listen, imagining the pageants he has witnessed, the tides of humanity washing through this same space century after century. A little further on a group of candle-bearing penitents file past. Their hoods hide their faces. Their bare feet slap softly on the stones. They chant a low refrain in the local tongue, words you cannot catch but whose cadence seems older than the city itself. Children fall silent as they pass, vendors bow their heads. The air seems to cool with their passing, and the smell of wax clings in their wake. You feel a prickle of awe, as if you have brushed against the invisible spine of the age. Drawn by curiosity you enter a side courtyard where the cathedral's great bells are hung. They loom above you, massive shapes suspended from beams, their bronze mouths dark. A caretaker sweeps sawdust from the floor and tells you how each bell has a name, how their notes mingle to form chords like voices in a choir. He taps one lightly and it hums, a sound you feel more than hear. Looking up at the enormous clappers you think of storms at sea, of thunder, of the beating heart of the city itself. Returning to the open square you find the food sellers closing their stalls. The smell of spiced wine thickens as they pour the last mugs. A young minstrel plays a final tune on his lute, a melody so sweet it stills the crowd for a moment before applause and coins follow. Overhead the towers are now black cutouts against a sky peppered with stars, and the lanterns glow pools around the players like islands of warmth. You feel the city settle into its night-shaped the day's commerce and devotions folded away, a hush stretching like a cloak over the stones. Yet even as it quiets, new life stirs. In the arcades under the cathedral's buttresses, scribblers, lovers, and conspirators whisper. A priest carries a small reliquary to a locked door, a beggar counts his coins under a niche statue, a young woman chalks a charm on the wall before slipping off into darkness. The square, emptied of spectacle, becomes intimate again, revealing its smaller currents to those who linger. You walk to the very center of the plaza and turn slowly. Everywhere you look are layers. Roman stones under Gothic towers, saints carved above tavern doors, laughter echoing under hymns. The cathedral does not just dominate the square, it infuses it, like wine soaking bread. And in this hour, when the performers have gone and the bells are silent, you can feel the building breathe with the city, massive and patient. Finally you drift toward a low wall at the edge of the square where the river's smell creeps up through grills. A few last pilgrims sit here, feet aching, sharing stories of their journeys. One old man tells of a miracle he saw at another shrine, a young couple listens, eyes wide. The stories overlap, swirl, and fade into the night. You realize that the square itself is a book written in footsteps and voices, each passerby another line of text. When you rise and begin to leave, you glance back. The towers catch a faint moonbeam, their edges silver. The statues' faces seem almost alive in the shifting shadows. You think of the day's pageant, stonemasons and glasscutters, merchants and minstrels, preachers and penitents all drawn into a single living picture by the gravity of the cathedral. Tomorrow a new pageant will unfold, different yet the same, as it has for centuries. And you, moving away into the narrow street, carry a fragment of that living square with you like a candle cupped in your hands. Chapter 5 Down to the River Quays. You leave the cathedral's shadow with its towers silvered by moonlight and slip into a street that smells faintly of damp stone and fish. The noise of the square fades behind you until all that remains is the muffled clop of hooves and the hush of your own breath. Here the city seems to exhale, the press of pilgrims and hawkers gives way to a slower rhythm, the lanes widening just enough to let in a draft of river air. Somewhere ahead a boatman calls out to a companion, his voice bouncing off the walls like a gull's cry. The lane twists, drops, and then opens suddenly onto the quays. The Seine lies before you like a dark ribbon, its surface mottled by reflections of torches and lanterns swaying on moored barges. Water laps at the stone embankment with a steady, secretive sound. The smell of pitch, tar, and wet rope fills your nostrils. It's the scent of travel and trade, of everything the city draws to itself from faraway coasts. Even at this hour the river is awake. Flat-bottomed boats creak as they rise and fall on the current. A pair of longshoremen shoulder barrels up a gangplank while their shadows stretch impossibly long under the torchlight. Along the quay warehouses squat like sleeping beasts. Their doors stand ajar to reveal heaps of salt, sacks of grain, bales of cloth. A cat darts out, tail high, chasing a rat along the stones. A barge from Rouen unloads casks of wine, a barge from Antwerp waits to be loaded with leather and dyed wool. You sense the pulse of the wider world here more than anywhere else. Each creates a story, each cargo a line connecting Paris to another port, another river, another sea. Voices mix, Norman, Flemish, Provençal. The city's heart may be up at the cathedral, but its veins end here in the water. A tavern clings to the edge of the quay, its door propped open to let out a wash of music. Inside, sailors drink beside clerks, and a jongleur sings of storms and shipwrecks. The smell of fried eel and onions makes your stomach tighten. Outside, on a bench, a girl stitches a sail by lantern light while an old man mends nets, his fingers moving with unthinking skill. A dog lies at his feet, ears flicking each time a bell tolls in the distance. You realize you could stay here for hours, simply watching this nocturnal theater play out, the slow movement of goods and stories in and out of the city. You walk further along the embankment where the current quickens. The bridges rise ahead, their arches catching shards of moonlight, and beyond them you glimpse the outline of an island where another church stands like a sentinel. Bargemen shout to one another, their voices echoing in the hollow underarches. The wind off the water carries not only the smell of the river but also a hint of open country, a coolness that tastes of elsewhere. Standing here, you can almost imagine yourself already traveling, your feet on a deck rather than cobblestones. As you pause at the edge of a landing stage, a small boat glides past, its single passenger cloaked and hooded. The oars dip silently, and in a moment it melts into the darkness under the bridge. A few coins change hands behind you, someone buying passage, perhaps to another bank, perhaps to another life. In this half-light the quays seem less like a workplace and more like a threshold, a liminal space between the city and the world beyond, between certainty and possibility. You take a deep breath. The air smells of cold iron and distant rain. Somewhere a bell rings midnight. The bargemen mutter, a lantern flares, and the river keeps moving. You step down to the edge of the quay, running your fingers along the damp stone, feeling the chill of the water just below. Tomorrow these same men will unload the same sacks, tell the same jokes. But for now, in this hour, the quays belong to no one and everyone, a mirror of the city's restless heart. You leave the landing stage and follow the curve of the quay toward the next bridge. The cobbles underfoot are slick with river mist, and your footsteps echo in a slow rhythm against the stone walls of the warehouses. Ahead, two figures push a cart laden with amphorae, the clay glints dull orange under torchlight. You catch the faint smell of olive oil, of spice, of resin, the Mediterranean arriving by way of barges and pack animals and now resting here in the Paris night. The cart creaks, its wheels dipping into ruts worn by 1,000 other loads, and you realize how many unseen hands labor to feed the city you've been walking all day. The bridge itself rises like a spine of stone. You pause at its midpoint, looking down at the dark water moving fast between the piers. Lanterns hang from iron brackets and sway in the breeze, throwing small islands of gold across the current. Beneath them, the river looks like hammered metal, rippled and dimpled with light. A barge slides silently under the arch, its deck piled with wood for winter fires. On its stern a boy sits cross-legged, plucking a small harp. The notes drift up to you, clear and delicate, and for a moment it seems as if the Seine itself is singing. On the far side of the bridge a new scent greets you with smoke and sweet pastry, honey and roasted nuts. Street vendors linger even at this hour, their braziers glowing red, selling treats to sailors and night watchmen. A woman in a headscarf holds out a cone of hot almonds, steam rising from her palms. You take one and taste the sugar, the warmth, the city itself condensed into a mouthful. Around her a knot of men gamble with dice on a barrelhead, their coins clinking softly. Beyond them, a scribe squats on the ground writing letters for those who cannot write their own, the parchment fluttering as a gust of river wind passes. You move on. The buildings here lean outward, their upper stories almost touching, so that you walk through a tunnel of timber beams and shadows. Somewhere a lute plays, somewhere else a baby cries. You pass a door where a painted sign shows a ship and a crescent moon. Inside, you glimpse hammocks slung between posts, sailors' gear piled in a corner. This is a lodging house for watermen, a temporary home between voyages. The smell of salt and damp wool drifts out as someone opens a shutter. You imagine the tales being swapped inside storms off Brittany, pirates near the Channel Islands, bargains made in secret coves. The quay widens again into an open space paved with flagstones. In its center stands a public well, its bucket creaking as a woman hauls up water. Around the edges, low sheds store nets and ropes, and a long timber frame holds several upturned boats drying for repairs. You walk among them as if among sleeping animals. Each hull carries scars, scraped paint, tar patches, carved initials. One bears a tiny cross at its prow, another a crude mermaid. The smell of oak and pitch is strong here. A young apprentice scrapes barnacles from a keel while his master smokes a pipe and watches the river's color to judge tomorrow's tide. You stop to look upriver where the current bends and disappears under another bridge. The city's towers spike the horizon, but here on the quay the sound of bells is muffled, replaced by water and wood, murmured deals, the soft slap of waves. You realize how different Paris feels from this vantage point, how much of its wealth rides on these currents. You can almost trace the lines of exchange: grain from Burgundy, wine from the Loire, salt from the coasts, cloth from Flanders, all converging here like tributaries of the same river of commerce. A large barge nudges against the stone steps near you. Men throw out ropes and haul in barrels, working by the glow of a single lantern hung on a pole. Their shadows leap and shrink on the wall like figures in a mystery play. You watch them for a long time, hypnotized by the rhythm of their labor. One whistles a tune that sounds like a lullaby, another answers with a curse in a dialect you can't place. Above them, gulls circle, their wings catching silver from the moon. The night deepens. A faint mist rises off the water and drifts across the quay, blurring edges, softening lanterns into halos. Somewhere a church bell strikes 1 o'clock. You realize you've been walking for hours, and yet the quays keep unspooling, each corner revealing another tableau, another life braided into the city's great net. Mist clings to your cloak as you press on along the embankment. The great mass of the city is behind you now. Here, at the edge, Paris breathes slower, like a giant at rest. The quay narrows into a footpath hemmed by warehouses whose doors are bolted for the night. Between the boards you see glimmers of stored wealth, wine barrels, sacks of grain, bales of wool, shadows of distant provinces stacked up like the memories of a long journey. A black cat darts across your path and vanishes under a stair. You come upon a small shrine set into the wall, a painted Madonna lit by a single votive candle. Someone has left a sprig of rosemary there, perhaps a sailor praying for a safe crossing at dawn. The flame shivers in the breeze, throwing her face into shifting relief, and you pause a heartbeat to inhale the scent of wax and herbs. In the distance, a night watchman's staff strikes stone 3 times, a warning, or merely the marking of his rounds. Ahead the river bends again and a set of stone steps drops down into the water like a staircase into another world. At the foot of the steps, a narrow skiff waits, rocking gently. Its owner, an old boatman with a reed cap, is mending a net by the glow of a tallow lamp. He nods without speaking as you pass, his eyes reflecting the light like a fox's. You imagine the thousands of dawns he has seen from that same perch, the tides of gossip and goods he has ferried, the secret meetings he has rowed across the current under cover of mist. A gust of wind brings the smell of wet timber, fish scales, and faraway sea. Above you the sky has cleared to a cold scatter of stars. Their reflections tremble in the river until a barge's wake disturbs them and they break apart. It feels as though you are walking through the city's bloodstream, following the pulse that keeps it alive. Every echo of rope against mast, every whispered bargain under an archway, every creak of cartwheel on cobblestone is a heartbeat. You pass under a low arch where the bridge foundations meet the quay. The ceiling here drips steadily, each drop hits the stones like a metronome. Beyond the arch the quay opens again, but it is quieter still, just a few lanterns swinging in the breeze. The last tavern by the river sits here, its door half open, light spilling in a warm wedge across the stones. Inside, a trio of minstrels plays a soft tune on fiddle and drum. A handful of patrons lean over mugs of ale, voices low. The smell of roasting onions and salted pork drifts out, mingling with the mist. You think of stepping inside but keep walking, tonight you are only a witness. Past the tavern the river widens, catching the moon like a sheet of polished steel. Here the quayside is lined with silent cranes and hoists, their long arms reaching over the water like skeletal birds. A solitary watchman sits on a barrel, hood drawn up, sharpening a knife with slow, deliberate strokes. His dog lifts its head as you approach, then settles again. The rhythm of the whetstone is almost hypnotic, you carry it with you as you move on. Now the city is thinning. The warehouses become boathouses, then cottages of fishermen. Gardens spill down to the water's edge, their fences crooked, herbs nodding in the dark. A small bell rings from somewhere, perhaps a chapel on an island in the river, and its echo seems to roll along the current until it dissolves. You realize you've walked beyond the point where most Parisians venture after nightfall. This is a liminal zone, half city, half country, where the river takes back its own voice. You climb a gentle rise and look back. The silhouette of Notre-Dame rises black against the sky, its towers like watchful sentinels. All the bridges you've crossed shimmer faintly with torches or lamps, a chain of fire leading into the heart of Paris. From here, the quays resemble a winding ribbon, and your own footsteps are just one thread woven into it. The sense of scale humbles you, so many lives, so many labors, converging on this river every day and night. At last you reach a small jetty where a ferry is moored. It will take early pilgrims across at dawn, but for now it rocks empty, creaking against its ropes. The ferryman sleeps nearby under a rough blanket. Beyond, a stand of trees lines the opposite bank, their leaves silver in the moonlight. You sit on a bollard and breathe in the cold air. The sounds of the city are muted now, and the river's murmur is like a lullaby. You've walked the quays from bustle to stillness, from commerce to quietude, until Paris itself feels like a living tale winding down for the night. Here ends the 5th chapter of your walk, not in a conclusion but in a pause, a still point from which the story of the city will rise again at dawn. You've seen its arteries and its lungs, its hidden corners and open plazas, and you feel both smaller and more alive for having traced them with your own feet. Chapter 6: The Dawn on the Isle de la Cite. A pale gray light steals across the water as you leave the quays and cross one of the low stone bridges. The Seine below is still as polished glass, carrying the first reflection of the sky like a whispered promise. The city has not yet woken, only the river moves, breathing out mist in slow curls that slip between the arches. You pull your cloak tighter and follow the sound of hooves on damp cobbles, a lone cart returning from the night's deliveries, wheels creaking, the driver humming under his breath. Halfway across, you pause. Ahead rises the Isle de la Cite, the very heart of medieval Paris. From this vantage the island is a silhouette of towers and turrets, softened by vapor. To your left the dark bulk of Notre-Dame crouches like a sleeping giant, its great rose window still unlit, gargoyles staring into the last of the night. To your right, smaller chapels and townhouses cling to the edge of the island, their balconies jutting over the river, candles flickering in one or two upper windows where bakers or clerks are already at work. Your boots strike the stone rhythmically as you step off the bridge and into a labyrinth of narrow lanes. The smell of damp wood and ashes lingers, shutters are still closed, but here and there a door opens and someone sweeps the threshold with quick, practiced strokes. A dog darts out to sniff at the gutter, then disappears again. Above, laundry lines sag between the upper stories, still heavy with last night's rain. The whole island feels suspended between worlds, poised between dark and light, between sleep and day. A bell tolls once from the far end of the island, deep and resonant. Then again, and again, joined by another. Soon a chorus of bells swells from every direction: Sainte-Chapelle, the Châtelet Tower, minor parish churches, their bronze voices overlapping until the air itself seems to vibrate. You feel it in your chest, in the stones beneath your feet. This is Paris breathing in the morning, calling its citizens to prayer and work, pulling itself upright after the long night. You turn toward the cathedral square. As you walk, the light strengthens, the mist thins and shapes emerge. Stall holders will carts into position, setting up for the day's first trade: candles, herbs, parchment, ribbons. A fishmonger lifts a basket from a cart, his hands blue with cold, and lays out the catch from the river on a slab of ice. A woman with a basket of rushes passes you, leaving a faint scent of green water and mud. Children run across the square carrying small loaves of bread still warm from the ovens, their laughter echoing off the high walls. At the center of the square, in front of Notre-Dame's great doors, pilgrims are already gathering. Some kneel on the flagstones, whispering prayers, others stand stiffly, clutching their bundles, eyes raised to the towers. Their cloaks are travel-stained, their faces lined from sun and road. You catch fragments of distant dialects: Occitan, Breton, German, like beads of color on a gray string. A friar moves among them, murmuring blessings, his breath making small clouds in the cold air. As the sun's first edge clears the horizon, it strikes the cathedral's facade, setting the carved saints aflame in gold. Light pours into every crevice, igniting halos, wings, scrolls. Even the gargoyles seem to soften. The pilgrims gasp softly, a young girl points upward, her mittened hand trembling. You feel the warmth on your own face, sudden and gentle, as though the city itself has turned toward you. You drift to the side of the square where a small stall sells hot wine and honey cakes. The vendor, a stout woman with a kerchief over her hair, ladles the steaming drink into a wooden cup for you. The scent of cloves and citrus rises with the steam. You take a cautious sip and feel it run through you like a spark. Around you the square is coming alive, voices rising, footsteps quickening. The bells have ceased but their echo lingers, a kind of invisible scaffolding holding up the morning. Beyond the cathedral, narrow streets lead deeper into the island, toward the royal palace and Sainte-Chapelle, toward courts and prisons, toward hidden gardens and secret stairways down to the water. You can choose any of them, and each will unfold a new facet of Paris at dawn. The city feels both immense and intimate at once, like a story you can step into at any page. You take another sip of wine and breathe in deeply. The cold is sharper now but your senses are awake. The day is beginning, and with it your walk through the living heart of medieval Paris continues. You finish the last sip of mulled wine, the sweetness clinging to your tongue, and step away from the vendor's stall. Ahead, the crowd begins to thin as pilgrims and traders scatter into the lattice of streets. A pair of watchmen in blue and white surcoats march past you, halberds glinting, their boots striking the stones in measured rhythm. One nods curtly as you pass, the smell of oiled leather and cold metal trails behind them. You slip into a lane that skirts the north side of the cathedral, the air cooling again as the sun dips behind the towers. Here the buildings press closer together, timber-framed houses lean out overhead like conspirators whispering across an alley. The walls are hung with iron signs, a carved goose for an inn, a painted quill for a scrivener, a chalice for a goldsmith. Shutters creak open and heads appear, calling down to friends or hawking the first wares of the day. The lane opens suddenly into a small square paved with worn stones. In the center a fountain splashes softly, fed by a hidden aqueduct. Pigeons flutter up as you approach, their wings clapping like a burst of applause. From here you can see the silhouette of the royal palace rising behind high walls, the heart of secular power on the island, just as Notre-Dame is the heart of the sacred. Flags hang limply from the battlements, still heavy with dew. Guards pace the perimeter, their helmets catching stray flashes of light. Crossing under a low archway, you find yourself in a long courtyard lined with clipped trees. Artisans and clerks hurry past carrying scrolls, satchels, trays of bread. A messenger on a lathered horse dismounts at the steps and runs inside, leaving a dark hoofprint on the cobbles. The smell here is different, less of the river and market, more of parchment, wax, and polished stone. Echoes ring under the vaulted galleries. The palace is awake. You drift toward Sainte-Chapelle, the royal chapel tucked like a jewel within the palace complex. From the outside it seems slender, almost fragile, its spire a needle stitching heaven to earth. But as you climb the worn stairs and step through the doors, the world bursts open. Even at this early hour, light is already flooding through the stained glass windows, walls of color rising to the ceiling, each pane a miniature world of prophets, kings, ships, and angels. The morning sun filters through reds and blues so deep they seem to pulse, dust motes turn to sparks in the air. You draw in a breath without realizing you'd stopped. A few courtiers kneel in prayer at the front, their fine cloaks pooled around them. A priest moves slowly along the aisle, murmuring the last Latin of the dawn office. The scent of incense hangs faintly, mingling with cold stone. You stand still, letting the glow soak into you until your eyes adjust and shapes sharpen. This is the Paris most never see, the hidden splendor behind the walls, the quiet power of ritual and art married together. When you step back outside, the world feels brighter, louder. Bells from smaller churches on the right bank answer one another across the water. The palace courtyard is filling now, scribes setting up benches under awnings, vendors with trays of sweetmeats for the waiting petitioners, falconers walking hooded birds on their wrists. Somewhere a lute begins to play, quick notes tripping like water over stones. The city's pulse is quickening. You follow a covered passage toward the western edge of the island where the Châtelet Tower looms. Here justice is dispensed, criminals tried, rumors whispered. The smell of damp stone returns, voices echo off the walls. A group of pilgrims presses past you, led by a friar holding a tall staff topped with a brass shell. Their feet leave a dark trail on the flagstones. Beyond them a herald in green livery strides toward the palace gates, unrolling a parchment as he goes, lips moving as he rehearses a proclamation. The passage empties you onto a balcony overlooking the Seine. Sunlight glints on the water, which now bustles with traffic, barges laden with barrels, ferryboats darting between banks, washerwomen kneeling on steps to beat cloth against stones. The bridges that you crossed earlier are now alive with movement, carts, donkeys, beggars, hawkers. Paris has fully woken, and you are at its very center, poised between sacred and secular, between court and cathedral. You lean on the railing for a moment, absorbing it all. The smell of the river mixes with roasting chestnuts from a brazier nearby, a gust of wind carries up snatches of song from a boatman below. Above your head, a carved stone angel on the palace wall gazes out toward the horizon, one hand raised as if in blessing or farewell. Beyond its upturned palm the rooftops of the right bank catch fire in the morning sun. You turn back toward the interior of the island. Narrow streets beckon. Some leading to quiet cloisters, others to bustling docks. The choice of path feels like the turning of a page. Wherever you go next, another layer of medieval Paris waits, ready to unfold. You leave the stone balcony with its view of the river and slip through an iron-bound door at the edge of the courtyard. A narrow flight of stairs winds downward, cool and dim, lit only by narrow slits cut into the wall. The noise of the palace fades behind you until there is only the echo of your own footfalls and the faint drip of water. The stairway deposits you into a cloistered passage lined with low arches. Here the smell of fresh herbs drifts from unseen gardens, somewhere nearby a fountain murmurs. Following the passage, you emerge into a hidden square enclosed on all sides by tall stone walls. In the center a knot garden unfolds in geometric pattern, sage, rosemary, thyme and lavender forming living tapestries at your feet. Monks and lay brothers bend over the beds, clipping or watering, their whispered conversation barely audible above the buzzing of bees. The air is warmer here, scented with green things and earth. Above, the towers of the palace rise like a backdrop in a theater, yet the place feels utterly separate, a pocket of stillness in the middle of the city. You walk slowly along a gravel path, fingertips brushing the clipped box hedges, and come to a carved wooden door set with a small grille. It creaks open to reveal another corridor, this one lined with painted panels showing saints and kings. Candles gutter in wall sconces, throwing long shadows across the floor. A single lay brother glances up from his sweeping, nods, and returns to his work. The corridor leads you to a flight of worn stone steps spiraling down again, the sound of water growing louder with each turn. At the bottom the world opens into an undercroft, a cool, vaulted hall running beneath the palace. Pillars rise like a forest of stone, their capitals carved with vines, birds, and strange faces. Light filters down through grilles in the ceiling, dust dancing in the beams. This is where the cellars, storerooms, and passageways to the river converge. You hear carts rumbling somewhere beyond, and the splash of oars. The smell of damp wood and tar tells you the Seine is close. You follow the undercroft toward a set of arched openings and step out onto a hidden landing directly at the river's edge. It's a secret world down here, low arches supporting the quay above, dark water lapping against moss-covered steps. A barge painted with the king's emblem is moored nearby, sailors in plain wool tunics haul sacks ashore. Across the water the right bank bustles, but here in the shadow under the arches the mood is quieter, almost conspiratorial. This is where messages are carried in and out, goods delivered before the city stirs. You descend the wet stone steps to the water. A fisherman in a small skiff casts his line in silence, two washerwomen beat linen on a plank, their chatter echoing off the vaults. Pigeons will and settle on the beams overhead. You kneel for a moment and trail your fingers in the river, cold, smooth, flecked with bits of straw. The current tugs gently, as if inviting you to follow it out from the island and into the greater world beyond Paris. Looking back, the palace and cathedral towers rise above the quay, their outlines softened by early sun and river mist. From this angle the splendor you saw earlier is veiled, the stone looks older, rougher, streaked with moss. It's as if you're seeing the bones of the city exposed, its secret arteries where life flows in and out unseen. You rise and walk along the quay beneath the arches. Small doors open here and there into cellars, kitchens, armories. The smell of baking bread mingles with river air, a cook tosses scraps to gulls circling overhead. You pass a shrine set into the wall, a painted Madonna behind iron bars, candles flickering at her feet. Someone has left a sprig of rosemary there. Someone else, a carved token of a ship. Even here at the water's edge, devotion clings to the stones. The passage bends and opens suddenly onto open sunlight at the tip of the island. Here the Seine divides, two arms rushing past. Trees grow along the bank, their leaves trembling in the breeze. Merchants wait with carts, sailors with ropes, a boy runs along the stones chasing a dog. You stand at the prow of the Isle de la Cité like at the bow of a ship, the city unfurling on either side. Bells ring behind you from Notre-Dame. Ahead, on the left bank, the university quarter waits with its scholars and booksellers. On the right, the markets, guild halls, and endless streets. You pause here, breathing deeply. Around you the voices of Paris weave together prayer and gossip, orders and laughter, the slap of oars, the hiss of the wind through leaves. You have walked from the cathedral square through the palace, chapel, cloister and cellar to the river's edge, tracing the island's secret spine from heaven to earth. The sun is higher now, casting long diamonds on the water. It is time to choose your next direction, to step off the island and into the next chapter of the city's life. Chapter 7 across to the left bank and the university quarter. You stand at the prow of the island where the two arms of the Seine divide, the city spread like a living map before you. Behind, the towers of Notre-Dame catch the new sun. Ahead, a bridge leads away from the Isle de la Cité to the southern shore. Its arches are low and sturdy, built of honey-colored stone darkened by centuries of rain and footsteps. Carts creak across it, wheels rumbling on worn planks, students in black gowns hurry in small groups, their voices echoing off the balustrades. Somewhere a lute strums faintly, carried on the morning breeze. You step onto the bridge. The water slides below in slow green folds, carrying bits of straw and the scent of faraway fields. Merchants lean on the parapet hawking cheap pamphlets and parchment scraps. A baker's boy slips between them with a basket of fresh bread, the crust still steaming. Pigeons scatter as a rider clatters past, cloak swirling. In the middle of the bridge a shrine to Saint Nicholas stands within a tiny alcove, candles flickering even in daylight. You pause and look back once more at the island, the cathedral's flying buttresses like wings, the palace roofs bristling with chimneys before turning south toward the left bank. On the far side the street narrows and climbs, cobbles uneven beneath your boots. The air smells different here, less of incense and royal kitchens, more of ink, parchment, and wood smoke from 100 small hearths. Bells ring out from unseen chapels, voices chant lessons in Latin. This is the university quarter, where Paris's students and masters live, work, and argue. You pass under a stone archway carved with faded coats of arms and emerge into a lane lined with bookshops. Thin, long-faced clerks set out trays of manuscripts, their covers painted in lapis and gold leaf. A pair of scholars debate at a street corner, gesturing with their quills like swords. You wander slowly, taking in the layered smells and sounds. A tavern door swings open to reveal a dim hall full of students hunched over mugs of spiced wine. Across the lane a scribe sits at a high desk copying a psalter by the window, his hand moving steadily even as passers-by bump the wall below. Above you, laundry hangs from wooden poles, fluttering like banners between crooked roofs. Cats stalk the gutters. Somewhere ahead a chorus of voices rises, a lecture spilling out into the street. Turning a corner, you reach one of the great colleges. Its gatehouse is flanked by statues of saints whose features are worn smooth by weather and the touch of countless hands. Inside the courtyard students cluster in groups, some arguing Aristotle, some simply dozing in the sun. Masters in long gowns stride across the gravel, their sleeves trailing. The smell of chalk and candle wax mingles with that of roasting chestnuts from a brazier near the gate. You stand quietly for a moment, feeling the life of learning pulse around you, so different from the silence of the cloisters you left behind. Beyond the college the street dips toward a small square where several lanes meet. Here booksellers spread their wares on low tables, not only psalters and scholastic treatises, but romances, travelogues, and slim volumes of poetry smuggled in from Italy. Students crowd around, coins clinking, fingers stained with ink. A beggar sings a rough ballad for alms, a blind man recites verses from memory. The air is alive with words, with stories, with ideas, a marketplace of the mind as busy as any fish market on the quays. You move on, deeper into the left bank. Each turn offers a new tableau, a cloister garden glimpsed through a half-open gate, a narrow alley where a cooper shapes staves to the rhythm of his mallet, a small church door where a handful of scholars kneel in prayer before returning to their disputes. Overhead the sky brightens from pale to clear blue, and the city begins to warm. Even here, where learning rules, life keeps its medieval texture. Mud in the street, hens in a courtyard, a washerwoman leaning from an upstairs window to pour out a basin of water. At last you emerge onto a wide, sloping street that runs straight down to the river. Ahead, a wooden footbridge crosses back toward the island, while on your left the spires of more colleges rise. Somewhere among them the Sorbonne itself hides, the beating heart of the university. Students stream past you in both directions, books tucked under arms, cloaks fluttering. A hawker sells pies from a portable oven, a stray dog noses at the crumbs. You stand at the center of it, feeling the thrum of another world within the city, a republic of letters, a noisy, restless, brilliant hive. You pause, letting the sound wash over you, preparing to step further into this quarter of scholars and taverns, of prayers and disputations. The morning is still young, but the left bank is already alive. Beyond its lanes lie gardens, convents, printing shops and hidden courtyards where more stories wait. Your walk through medieval Paris continues, each street another page, each turning a line in the great book of the city. You turn off the main street into a narrower lane, its cobbles patched with straw and paper scraps blown from open shutters above. The noise of the bridge and river fades, here the sound is softer but more intense, a murmur of quill scratching, voices reciting, the hollow knock of wooden tablets as students practice their declensions. You follow a group of young men in worn black gowns. They are carrying rolls of parchment bound with leather thongs, laughing and jostling each other. A teacher in a scarlet cap glides past, eyes fixed ahead as though already engaged in an argument inside his own mind. On your right, a low door set into a stone wall bears a sign painted with an inkpot and quill. Pushing it open you enter a scriptorium. The air is warm and smells of glue, parchment, and ground pigments. Long benches run the length of the room, at each sits a scribe bent over a sheet of vellum. Sunlight filters through oiled linen windows, catching in tiny particles of dust so that it looks like gold mist drifting above the desks. A boy moves silently between the rows with a tray of sharpened quills, replacing the dull ones. You watch for a moment as a man illuminates an initial letter, his brush trembling to form the tiny curl of a dragon's tail. Back in the street you cross into another courtyard, this one belonging to a college of theologians. The buildings form a square around a patch of grass. In the center stands a fountain shaped like a lion, water spilling from its mouth into a stone basin where birds come to drink. Cloisters run along the inner walls, their arches carved with vines and angels. Students stroll or stand in knots beneath them, reading aloud to each other, sometimes breaking into song. In one corner a friar is lecturing, his words echoing off the stone. A circle of listeners lean forward, brows furrowed, as though each syllable might change the course of their lives. At the far end of the courtyard a staircase climbs to a heavy wooden door bound with iron. You ascend slowly, the worn steps hollowed by generations of feet. Inside you find a library. The scent is immediate and unmistakable: dry parchment, old wood, candle smoke. High windows let in thin blades of light that cut across rows of chained books. Some volumes are as large as paving stones, their clasps decorated with brass. Others are small, bound in simple leather. The silence is profound. Only the soft shuffle of slippers and the occasional creak of a lectern disturb it. A student copies a text at a sloped desk, his lips moving as he writes. Another stands on a stool to reach a shelf above his head. You move between the rows, fingertips trailing lightly over the spines. Titles in Latin, Greek, Hebrew. A sense of time thickens here, a weight of thought, of lives spent gathering, glossing, preserving. In one alcove a master sits with a group of pupils, reading aloud from Aristotle, pausing to explain each phrase. His voice is low, patient, yet the student's eyes shine with hunger for each word. In another, a young woman cloaked as a novice is secretly copying a French romance into the margins of a psalter, her quill darting like a bird. When she notices you she hides her face behind her sleeve. When you step back into the sunlight the courtyard seems louder, the air fresher. Bells ring for the midday disputation. Groups of scholars hurry past you toward a lecture hall, books under their arms, cloaks flaring. You follow, curious, into a large hall whose roof is supported by wooden beams carved with faces. At the far end a raised chair stands beneath a canopy, where the master will preside. Benches fill quickly, students climb onto windowsills or stand along the walls. A clerk brings in a bundle of parchment questions and nails them to a post. A murmur of excitement runs through the crowd. The disputation begins, a formal argument on a point of theology. The challenger speaks, the respondent replies, questions are posed, objections raised, answers refined. Voices rise and fall, sometimes sharp as swords, sometimes soft as prayers. You watch as the ritual unfolds, as minds. When at last the master rises and pronounces judgment the hall bursts into applause and laughter, students spilling back into the courtyard to continue the debate in clusters under the arches. As you drift with them into the lanes beyond, the university quarter seems to open wider, like a labyrinth. Behind each heavy door a college, behind each college, a garden, a chapel, a hidden stairway leading who knows where. You glimpse a kitchen through a side window where novices knead bread, hear a chant from a small oratory tucked between two houses. On one street a bookseller displays not only manuscripts but the first printed sheets, fresh from a press in Mainz, a marvel whispered about in every tavern. On another, a barber surgeon sharpens his razors while students argue philosophy beside him, the scent of blood and soap mingling with candle wax. The day tilts toward afternoon. Sunlight pools in the courtyards and glances off the slate roofs. A boy with a basket of figs runs past you toward a refectory, a cat dozes on a warm step. Everywhere there is movement, talk, the layering of worlds sacred and secular, old and new, tradition and discovery. You pause beneath an archway and listen, to the hum of study, the laughter of youth, the quiet turning of pages behind thick walls. This is the left bank's heart, a city within the city, and you are walking through it as though through a living book. You breathe in slowly, preparing to wander still deeper into the hidden gardens, the cloisters, the stairways that drop back to the river, the last secret corners of medieval Paris's world of learning. You slip through an archway that seems, at first, no different from the others, yet it opens into a cloistered garden with no street plan ever mentioned. The noise of the colleges falls away behind thick walls, only the murmur of a fountain remains. Gravel paths radiate from a central stone basin where lilies float, their white heads bending in the faint breeze. Vines climb the surrounding arches, their leaves filtering the sunlight into a green hush. Students and friars walk here slowly, reading aloud to themselves, or sit beneath the vines copying notes. It feels less like a garden than like a breathing pause in the city's ceaseless pulse. Past the fountain a narrow stair curls downward. You take it, hand sliding along a cool stone rail worn satin smooth by centuries. The stair empties into a vaulted corridor lit by small windows. Through one you glimpse the gardens above, through another, the dark shimmer of the river far below. Voices echo faintly, you follow them, emerging into a refectory built partly underground. Long tables stretch beneath beams blackened by age. The scent of bread and honeyed wine fills the air. Novices and scholars alike eat in silence, heads bowed, a reader standing at a lectern reciting a text between mouthfuls. Candles gutter, their light pooling on bowls and cups like small, patient stars. From the refectory a low door opens into a tiny chapel carved from the rock itself. The air is damp, cool, and fragrant with wax. Frescoes bloom dimly on the walls, saints, beasts, curling foliage. A single lamp swings from the ceiling. You stand at the back and listen to a lone singer practicing antiphons, her voice rising and falling like water over stones. When she finishes the silence deepens until it seems you can hear the earth turning under the city. Back in the corridor you follow the faint rush of water and step through yet another door. Suddenly you are outside again, in a hidden garden at the foot of the colleges. Here the Seine laps softly against mossy steps, a narrow landing juts out, used by bargemen who deliver supplies unseen from the busy quays. Willows trail their fingers into the current. Across the water you can see the towers of Notre-Dame, their outlines softened by the afternoon light. It feels as though you have slipped through time, moving from the noise of study to a secret hermitage where the city reveals its quiet heart. A small group of students sits on the landing, boots off, feet dangling above the water. One sketches the view of the cathedral while another reads aloud from a book of romances. Their voices carry like birdsong. A friar arrives with a basket of apples, setting it down to share. For a moment there is laughter, a splash, someone skipping a flat stone across the river's surface. You stand a little apart, absorbing the scene, the mingling of sacred and secular, the weaving of knowledge with ordinary pleasures, the way life here spills beyond walls and rules to touch the river itself. You follow the path along the bank as it curves behind warehouses and under low arches. Barges moored here rock gently, their hulls painted with saints and emblems. A cooper rolls a barrel from a boat, humming. A washerwoman wrings linen into the water, her arms strong, her skirt hitched up. Students hurry past carrying sacks of grain from a delivery, their laughter echoing off the stones. The river smells of wet wood, tar, and crushed herbs from the gardens above. Gradually the path rises again toward the street level. You climb a flight of worn stairs, turning at intervals to catch glimpses of the water through gaps in the masonry. At the top you emerge onto a bridge that leads back toward the heart of the left bank. Behind you the college towers rise, their bells tolling the late afternoon. Before you the city stretches, roofs huddled like a shoal of fish, chimneys smoking in the cool air. You pause at the midpoint of the bridge. Barges slide beneath, students and friars crossing above, the cathedral glowing across the river like a promise. The university quarter lies at your back, yet its murmur seems to follow you. The scratch of quills, the hush of libraries, the low debate of minds meeting. Ahead lie taverns, lecture halls, hidden gardens still unexplored. For now you simply lean on the stone balustrade, letting the scene flow through you as the Seine flows under your hands, a living thread binding all the city's worlds together. With slow steps you continue, ready to wander deeper into the left bank's veins as evening draws near, the bells of Vespers beginning to ring in the distance. Chapter 8 Evening on the River and the Taverns of the Students. The bells of Vespers drift across the water, each toll stretching into the autumn air like a rope of sound. As you cross from the university quarter back toward the riverside, the light softens, the sky above Paris glows in rose and pale gold, fading toward indigo. The towers of Notre-Dame burn with a last inner fire, their stone catching the sun's retreat. The Seine reflects it all in broken shards, a living mirror that trembles under passing barges. Down on the quays, the day's commerce has ended. The great cranes stand idle, ropes slack. Wine barrels lie stacked against the walls, their seals glistening with wax. A fishmonger hoses down his stall, a boy sweeps sawdust into the current. Horses stamp in the shadows, steam curling from their nostrils. You can smell tar, salt, and the faint sweetness of spilled grain. Overhead, gulls wheel and cry before settling to roost on the bridge's edge. You wander along the quay as evening settles, watching as lamps are lit one by one. At first only a few pinpoints flicker, but soon whole rows of oil lamps flare to life, their flames shaking in the breeze. They cast a golden ladder on the river's surface. Boatmen tie off their craft for the night and shout to each other across the water. Somewhere upriver a lute begins to play a wandering melody, thin but bright against the deepening hush. Past the warehouses the riverbank widens into a small landing where students gather at dusk. The air here is warmer, touched with the smell of roasting chestnuts from a brazier. A man with a tray of cheap wine ladles it into clay mugs. Young clerics, their robes loosened, lean against the parapet laughing. Someone sings a drinking song, another beats time with a spoon against a mug. A girl with dark hair and a rough cloak sells ballads copied on scraps of parchment, her voice rising above the chatter as she recites verses about knights and lovers. You slip among them. The crowd is a tangle of languages: Latin for study, French for trade, Occitan for song. The students smell of parchment, ink, and the river wind, their hands are stained from quills but also calloused from hauling supplies. They argue about Aristotle and theology while passing around bread and cheese. One points to the cathedral silhouette and quotes a line from a new poem. For a moment you're caught between centuries, the medieval city's grime and its yearning for beauty colliding here on the edge of the Seine. Beyond the quay a narrow street leads uphill to a tavern known for student gatherings. Its sign creaks above the door, a painted dolphin faded by time. Inside, the ceiling is low, beams blackened by years of smoke. Candles burn in iron sconces, dripping wax onto the tables below. The smell of ale and wood smoke wraps around you. A fiddler in the corner scrapes out a lively tune while a boy beats a drum with his fists. The crowd is dense: scholars, scribes, off-duty guards, washerwomen, even a wandering minstrel with a battered harp. You find a seat near the hearth where a great pot of stew bubbles, releasing a scent of onions, herbs, and beef. The innkeeper, a red-faced man with arms like hams, ladles out portions and slams mugs of ale onto the table. Conversations rise and fall like waves, a debate over the price of vellum, a whispered love story, a bawdy joke that erupts into laughter. In one corner a friar recounts a miracle, in another, a student sings a lament for his homeland. It is noisy, warm, alive, the city's learning and its pleasures poured into one small room. As you sit, listening, the sound of the river still filters in through the shutters. It mingles with the tavern's music and the clatter of mugs, creating a rhythm uniquely Parisian, where water and word, stone and song, all blend. The day's walk seems to echo here, the bridges, the markets, the hidden gardens, now culminating in this dim tavern where minds and bodies alike find release. Outside, the sky deepens at night. The cathedral's bells strike again, a low rolling chime. Students drift out of the tavern, linking arms, still singing. Some stumble back toward the colleges, others disappear into side streets that smell of bread and tallow. Lanterns bob ahead of them like fireflies. The Seine carries their voices away, dissolving them into its slow current. You rise and follow, stepping out into the cool air. The tavern door swings shut behind you, cutting off the warmth and noise. Ahead lies the river, dark now except for the gold tremor of lamps. Across it the towers of the city stand like black cutouts against the stars. You can feel the walk pulling you onward down toward another quay, another bridge, another hidden passage that will reveal yet another facet of medieval Paris before the night is done. Leaving the warmth of the tavern, you drift along the quay again, and the night seems to unfold around you like a vast tapestry. The hum of voices fades behind you, replaced by the steady slap of water against the stone embankment. Lanterns swing in the hands of watchmen who patrol the bridges, their light makes little pools of gold on the cobblestones before vanishing into shadow. Overhead, the sky has turned a deep velvet blue stitched with cold stars. In the distance the towers of Notre-Dame are black silhouettes now, the last glow of sunset extinguished. A faint mist rises off the Seine. It carries the scents of the city wine and fish, wax and smoke, damp stone. Every now and then a barge glides past, its hull groaning, oars dipping silently into the dark water. Shadows move along its deck, perhaps merchants, perhaps pilgrims, perhaps contraband. From the far bank a single bell rings, a slow solemn toll that seems to hang in the mist long after it ends. You pass under an archway where a small group of students cluster around a street poet. He stands on a barrel reciting verses by torchlight, his gestures sharp, his Latin rolling into French couplets. A girl with ink-stained fingers scribbles down lines on a scrap of parchment, a boy strums a lute, providing a thin but persistent tune. Their shadows leap high on the wall behind them, like medieval illustrations coming to life. For a moment you linger, caught by the rhythm of the words, the spark of their arguments, the scent of roasting chestnuts from a brazier nearby. Beyond them, a narrow lane twists away from the river toward a row of low houses. Here the city changes again. The clatter of taverns recedes, replaced by the muffled murmur of households settling for the night. Shutters close, candles gutter and are snuffed. You glimpse, through half-open doors, women spinning by the fire, a child being put to bed, a clerk bent over a ledger. Laundry flutters on a line strung across the alley, pale flags in the darkness. Cats slip between your feet, their eyes catching the lamplight like chips of green glass. A small stone stairway leads down to a hidden landing where fishermen mend their nets even at night. They work by touch, their fingers moving like spiders over the cords. A lantern sways above them, throwing long streaks of light across the wet cobbles. They speak little, only the hiss of their knives on wood and the occasional murmur breaks the silence. You stand at the top of the steps watching them, feeling for a moment that you've stepped entirely outside of time. From the landing you can see another tavern boat moored along the quay. Its deck is covered by a canvas awning, and inside flicker dozens of small lamps. Music drifts across the water, a dulcimer, a flute, soft voices singing a refrain about lost kings. Curious, you walk along the bank until you reach its gangplank. A boy in a ragged cap beckons you aboard for a coin. When you step onto the planks, the whole boat shifts under your feet and the city tilts with it. The tavern boat is a world unto itself. Benches line the sides, a brazier smolders at the center giving off a sweet, spiced smoke. People of every kind are gathered here, sailors, scribes, merchants, even a veiled noblewoman with a ring glinting on her finger. They drink watered wine from clay cups and play dice on the low tables. Overhead the canvas billows like a pale sail, catching the glow of the lamps. The Seine laps just beyond, and every so often the boat rocks gently, reminding you that you are floating between the banks, between two halves of a medieval city. A minstrel begins a tale. His voice is low and measured, weaving a story of a student who outwitted the devil by quoting Aristotle, of a washerwoman who became a queen, of bridges that sing at midnight. The listeners lean in, smiling, nodding, making the sign against evil at certain turns. The story folds the city's night around you, making it seem even richer, more mysterious. You realize that this is what Paris has always been, not only stones and water, but a living narrative, constantly spoken, sung, argued, and rewritten. Outside, the mist thickens, muffling the bells and the noise of carts. The boat's lamps glow like captured stars. When you disembark, the quay feels different, quieter, more secret. You walk on, past warehouses that are now only dark masses against the river's sheen, past moored barges where watchmen drown under cloaks. Ahead, another bridge arches out of the fog, its statues of saints half vanished in the swirl. Beyond it lie more lanes, more squares, more stories waiting to be found. You pause at the bridge's crest. The river slides beneath you, black and silent except for faint ripples of reflected light. Somewhere down there a fish jumps, making concentric circles that widen and fade. Overhead a shooting star streaks across the sky. You draw your cloak tighter and breathe in the damp air heavy with the scent of wood smoke and wine. The city stretches in every direction, an endless labyrinth of stone and shadow, bells and voices, and you sense there is still more to walk, more to discover before the night gives way to dawn. Epilogue: the memory of a walk. Dawn lifts, pale and uncertain, over the rooftops of Paris. Smoke rises from kitchen chimneys, mingling with the mist that clings to the river. The bridges you crossed all night now look like simple stone spines arching from bank to bank. The market stalls are shuttered, the tavern doors closed, the colleges silent. Yet, as you walk back through the streets, you sense the echo of everything you have just lived, bells tolling over the Isle de la Cite, the hush of cloisters, the raucous tavern songs, the scent of bread and wet timber on the quays. A city is not only its stones and water but the movement of people through them, the weaving of countless small moments into a pattern. In the dim light of morning, those patterns seem to float just above the cobblestones, a memory you could almost reach out and touch. You imagine the washerwoman at the well lifting her first bucket, the student blowing out his candle, the oarsman easing his barge into the current. You are part of their story now, and they of yours. By the time you reach the last bridge, the sun has begun to gild the towers of Notre-Dame. The river runs bright as molten glass. The city is waking, your long, wandering night has come full circle. You stop for a moment, resting your hands on the cold stone parapet, and look back. Medieval Paris recedes like a dream at the edge of consciousness, yet its textures remain on your skin, the chill of mist, the roughness of carved wood, the warmth of candlelit rooms. You cross the final span. The sound of your footsteps blends with the first carts rolling toward the markets. In a few moments this labyrinth will be bustling again, but you have walked it at a rare hour and heard its quieter voice. The city has shown you its hidden self, and you carry that self with you now, not a map or a guidebook, but a living impression of a night walked in another time. And so your journey ends where it began, on the banks of the Seine, the smell of the water rising, the bells answering one another across the rooftops. The story is finished, but the city remains, waiting for the next wanderer to trace its winding paths.